I'm going to tell you about something that happened to me 3 years ago when I was 16. It still keeps me up some nights, and I still check the windows before I go to sleep. We were staying in North Carolina that summer, not far from the Blue Ridge Parkway. My parents had rented this little cabin for a week. No wife, barely any cell signal, but surrounded by trees and trails that my dad wouldn't stop calling refreshing. I had just turned 16 and wasn't thrilled about being pulled away from my friends for a family bonding trip, but I'd packed my sketchbook, earbuds, and a backup battery. I figured I could survive a few days of trail mix and mosquito bites. My family was me, my parents, and my younger sister Emma, who was 12 at the time. That morning, we'd set out early for a popular overlooked trail. It was foggy but beautiful in that way mountains can be when the mist hangs low between the trees. We'd been hiking for about 45 minutes when the fog started getting thicker. Emma was complaining about her feet hurting, and Dad kept saying we only had 20 minutes left to reach the summit. I was taking pictures of the trees and sketching in my notebook whenever we stopped to rest. The trail wasn't too crowded that morning, maybe because of the fog. We'd only passed two other groups of hikers going the opposite direction. Mom was the first one to notice. We'd stopped at a clearing to catch our breath when she pointed toward the ridge on our left, maybe 200 yards away. "Is that someone up there?" she asked. We all looked. Through the fog, I could make out a figure standing on the ridge. At first, I thought it was just another hiker taking in the view, but something felt off. The person wasn't moving at all, just standing there completely still. Dad pulled out his binoculars and looked. "Can't see clearly with all this fog," he said. "But yeah, looks like someone's up there, probably just enjoying the scenery." But his voice had this uncertain edge to it. Emma tugged on Mom's sleeve. "Can we go back? I don't like this." "We're almost at the top, sweetie," Mom said, but she kept glancing back at the ridge. We continued hiking, but I kept looking back over my shoulder. The figure was still there, and even though I couldn't see details through the fog, I had this strong feeling they were watching us. About 10 minutes later, I turned around again. The figure was gone. I felt a weird mix of relief and unease. Where had they gone? There was no trail visible on that ridge from where we were. When we finally reached the overlook, the view was beautiful despite the fog blocking parts of it. Dad took family photos while Mom handed out granola bars and water bottles. Emma was climbing on some flat rocks, and I wandered around sketching the landscape. That's when Dad noticed something that changed the whole mood. "Hey, look at this," he called out. We gathered around where he was crouching near some damp soil. There were fresh boot prints pressed into the mud. They were big, maybe a size 11 or 12, and they looked recent. What was strange was that they didn't come from the main trail. They came from the brush on the side, like someone had walked through the woods to get here. "Probably just a ranger or another hiker going off trail," Mom suggested, but she didn't sound convinced. Dad shook his head slowly. "Look where these lead." He pointed, and we followed the prints with our eyes. They led to a spot behind some thick bushes, a place with a direct view down to the trail we just climbed. Someone had been standing there, watching people coming up the path. Near the spot, I found an old candy wrapper and a couple of cigarette butts. "We should head back," Dad said quietly. His whole demeanor had changed. The relaxed vacation Dad was gone, replaced by someone alert and worried. On the way down, Emma whispered to me, "I feel like someone's following us." I wanted to tell her she was being silly, but I felt it too. Every time we stopped, I thought I heard footsteps behind us stop too. Just the sound of boots on dirt and leaves, matching our pace, then going silent when we went silent. Dad noticed it too. I could tell by the way he kept looking back and how he moved us all to walk in front of him. We got back to the cabin around late afternoon. Everyone was tired and on edge, but we tried to act normal. Dad made dinner while Mom checked her phone, frustrated by the weak signal. Emma and I set up my laptop to watch a movie, trying to distract ourselves from the weird feeling the hike had left us with. Around 10 o'clock, we all headed to bed. Emma and I shared a room with two twin beds. I was exhausted but couldn't seem to fall asleep. My mind kept going back to that figure on the ridge and the boot prints at the overlook. Around 1 in the morning, I woke up to a sound. At first, I thought it might be an animal, maybe a bear or raccoon getting into something outside. But then I realized it was coming from the front porch. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the wooden boards. Creak, creak, creak. Each step careful and measured. I lay completely still, my heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps moved around the cabin and then they stopped right outside our bedroom window. I could see a shadow through the thin curtains. Someone was standing there, just standing, not moving, for at least 30 seconds. Then the shadow shifted and the footsteps continued around the cabin. I reached over and shook Emma awake, putting my finger to my lips. Her eyes went wide when she heard the sounds. Together, we crept out of our room and woke up our parents. Dad grabbed a flashlight and the baseball bat he'd brought from home. He opened the front door carefully and shined the light around the porch and yard. Nothing, just darkness and trees and the sound of wind through the leaves. He walked around the entire cabin with the flashlight while we waited inside, but he didn't find anything. When he came back in, Mom said, "Maybe it was just a bear. They come around cabins sometimes." But Dad looked worried. "Maybe," he said, but I could tell he didn't believe it. We checked all the door locks and Dad kept the bat next to his bed. The next morning, Dad went outside as soon as it was light. I watched from the window as he walked slowly around the cabin, looking at the ground. After about 10 minutes, he came back inside and called Mom over. They talked in low voices, and I could tell something was wrong. When Emma and I came into the kitchen, Dad showed us the photos on his phone. Boot prints in the soft dirt beneath our bedroom window. Big prints, the same size as the ones we'd seen on the mountain. There were more prints around the cabin too, like someone had circled the building multiple times. Near the tree line, he'd found 3 or 4 cigarette butts that looked fresh. "I'm calling the owner," Dad said. He stepped outside where the cell signal was slightly better. We could hear bits of his conversation. The owner said they'd never had problems like this before, suggested it might be lost hikers or someone trespassing, and recommended calling the ranger station if it happened again. Dad called the ranger station next. They said they'd increase patrols in the area but made it sound like it wasn't that unusual. People wandered onto private property sometimes, especially around rental cabins. "I think we should leave," Mom said after Dad hung up. "This doesn't feel right." "We paid for the whole week," Dad argued, but even he sounded uncertain. "It might have just been some random person. Now that we've reported it, they probably won't come back." We decided to stay but agreed not to go on any more hikes. We'd stick close to the cabin. That afternoon, we played board games and tried to act like everything was normal, but the mood was tense. Emma didn't want to sleep in our room alone, and I didn't blame her. Dad kept getting up to look out the windows, checking the yard and the tree line. The second night was worse. Dad checked all the locks multiple times. He kept the bat and flashlight right by the front door. We watched TV together in the living room until about 11, then headed to bed. Emma slept in Mom and Dad's room, and I slept alone but left my door open. At 12:30, I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. 3 soft knocks on the front door. My eyes flew open in the darkness. I heard Dad get up immediately. I crept to my doorway and saw him standing in the hallway, completely still, listening. Silence for about 2 minutes. Then the knocking came again, this time from the back door. Tap, tap, tap. Same rhythm, same intensity. Dad whispered to Mom to try calling 911, but she shook her head. "No signal," she mouthed. Dad grabbed the bat and turned on the porch light, then shouted, "I'm calling the police. Leave now." His voice was loud and firm, trying to sound more confident than he probably felt. The knocking stopped. Dad led us into the bathroom, the only room without windows, and told us to stay there. He went to check each window with the bat in his hands. After about 10 minutes, he called us out. "I don't see anyone," he said. But when he opened the back door and shined his flashlight around, he saw something that made him freeze. "Everyone stay back," he said sharply. There, stretched across the path from the back door, was a rope tied between two posts, positioned right at ankle height. A trip wire. If Dad had run outside like his instinct probably told him to, he would have fallen hard. Mom gasped. Emma started crying quietly. This wasn't just someone wandering around anymore. This was deliberate. This was planned. Dad cut the rope down and took pictures of everything with his phone. "We're leaving," Mom said. "Right now, I don't care what time it is." "It's 1 in the morning," Dad said. "The mountain roads are dangerous in the dark, especially with no cell signal. If something happens or we need help, we're stuck. We'll leave at first light, but we all stay together until then." We gathered in the living room with all the lights on. Dad sat in a chair facing the door with the bat across his lap. Mom made coffee. Emma and I huddled on the couch under blankets, neither of us able to sleep. I'd never seen my parents look so scared. At 2 in the morning, we heard the footsteps again. This time they were louder, more confident, walking around the perimeter of the cabin, not trying to hide anymore. Dad stood up. "We're leaving in the morning," he shouted toward the door. "Just leave us alone." The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed felt even more menacing than the sounds had been. Then, after about a minute, we heard something hit the kitchen window hard. The sound of shattering glass made us all scream. Dad ran toward the kitchen and I followed. A large rock, maybe the size of a softball, was lying on the floor surrounded by broken glass. The window had a hole punched through it. Mom pulled Emma and me close, and Emma was crying hard now. Dad tried 911 again, and this time, miraculously, he got a weak signal. The dispatcher said they'd send rangers and a sheriff's deputy, but it would take at least 45 minutes because of how remote we were. "Pack everything now," Dad told us. "We're leaving the second they get here." We threw everything into bags as fast as we could, then loaded it all into the car. We sat in the living room, waiting, jumping at every sound. I kept my sketchbook clutched to my chest like it could somehow protect me. The rangers and a deputy sheriff arrived around 3:30. They searched around the cabin with powerful flashlights and found even more boot prints, more cigarette butts, and the broken glass. The deputy took our statements and photos of everything. He said this was serious trespassing, vandalism, and possibly attempted assault given the trip wire. They'd investigate, he promised, but strongly suggested we leave for our own safety. At 5 in the morning, as the sky was just starting to lighten, we left the cabin with a ranger escort. We drove down the mountain in complete silence except for Emma's occasional sniffles. The 6-hour drive home felt endless. None of us talked much. We were all too shaken, too exhausted, too relieved to be leaving. About a week later, the deputy sheriff called Dad. They'd found a small campsite roughly half a mile from our cabin, hidden in the woods. Someone had been staying there for several days. They found a sleeping bag, empty food wrappers, and a notebook. Dad's voice got quiet when he told us what was in the notebook. Sketches of our cabin, notes about our schedule, what times we left and came back, drawings of the trail we'd hiked. And strange, rambling notes that didn't make complete sense, but were disturbing enough that the deputy wouldn't read them to Dad over the phone. They never found whoever it was. The investigation went on for a few weeks, but the person had vanished. The cabin owner refunded our money and apologized profusely, said they were installing a full security system before renting it out again. I still have nightmares sometimes about that shadow outside the window. Emma went to therapy for a few months afterward. She had trouble sleeping and would wake up panicking. Our family doesn't go camping anymore. We tried once the next summer, but none of us could relax. Every sound made us jump. Dad thinks it was probably a drifter or someone with mental health issues who fixated on our family for some reason. But the way everything was planned, the trip wire, the schedule watching, the systematic stalking, it makes me think whoever it was knew exactly what they were doing. They were patient, they were methodical, and they wanted to hurt us. I'm 19 now, but I still think about that summer in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I think about what might have happened if we hadn't woken up when we did, or if Dad had run outside into that trip wire, or if we decided to stay one more night. Sometimes I wonder if that person is still out there in those mountains, watching some other family, planning something terrible. I hope they caught them, but deep down, I don't think they ever did. My brother Jake and I had been planning this trip for months. After Mom passed away 2 years ago, I became his legal guardian when I was 26 and he was 15. Now he was 17 and about to head off to college, and I wanted one last adventure together before he left. I work as a software developer at a tech startup in Portland, and between the constant deadlines and Jake's senior year activities, we barely saw each other anymore. He'd gotten really into landscape photography over the past year, probably as a way to cope with everything we'd been through, and he kept talking about wanting to photograph the fall colors from the ridge overlooks in the Cascade Range. So that October, we loaded our mountain bikes onto my Subaru Outback along with our lightweight camping gear and headed out early on a Saturday morning. Jake was more excited than I'd seen him in months, already planning his camera settings for the sunset shots he wanted to capture. The drive took us about 3 hours into the mountains, and I remember thinking this was exactly what we both needed. The ride up to the ridge campsite was brutal, about 5 miles of steep switchbacks and loose gravel that had both of us breathing hard. Jake kept stopping every quarter mile or so to photograph the golden aspens and the way the afternoon light filtered through the trees. I didn't mind the breaks since my legs were burning anyway. We reached the ridge around 2 in the afternoon, and the view was absolutely stunning. The campsite sat on a flat area right at the edge of an overlook, with the whole valley spread out below us like a massive painting. Behind our campsite, a rocky cliff face rose up about 100 feet, creating a natural wall at our backs. The weather was perfect, maybe 60 degrees with a light breeze that carried the smell of pine and dried leaves. We set up our tent about 15 feet from the ridge edge, far enough to be safe but close enough for Jake to get his sunrise shots in the morning. After we got camp established, I fired up our portable stove and cooked some pasta while Jake wandered around with his camera, completely absorbed in getting the perfect angles of the sunset. When he came back to eat, his face was lit up with excitement. "This is incredible," he said, showing me the back of his camera. "These are going to be the best photos I've ever taken." I taught him how to adjust his exposure settings for the changing light, and we talked about his plans to study photography and journalism at the University of Washington. It felt like the old days before Mom got sick, when things were simpler. We even shared some stories about her, laughing at the good memories and getting a little quiet at the sad ones. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting everything in shades of orange and purple, I felt genuinely at peace for the first time in months. We were sitting on a flat rock near our tent around 5:30, watching the last light fade from the sky, when I heard the distinct sound of bike tires on gravel. I turned around, surprised because we hadn't seen anyone else on the trail coming up. A woman appeared from around a bend in the trail, pedaling a mountain bike slowly toward us. She looked to be in her late 30s or early 40s, wearing expensive-looking hiking clothes that were covered in dirt and what looked like tears in the fabric. Her long brown hair was tangled and matted, hanging around a face that had several fresh scratches across one cheek. What really struck me was her eyes. They were bloodshot and had this wild, exhausted look, like she hadn't slept in days. She stopped her bike about 20 feet from us, and I noticed Jake instinctively move closer to me. The woman just stared at us for a long moment, particularly at Jake, who still had his camera hanging around his neck. "Have you seen my hiking partner?" she finally asked, her voice shaking slightly. "We got separated yesterday." Something about the whole situation felt off immediately. She wasn't carrying a backpack or any gear except for a small hip pack, which seemed strange for someone who'd supposedly been out here since yesterday. And her bike, I noticed there were dark stains on the seat that looked disturbingly like dried blood. No, sorry, we haven't seen anyone else up here, I replied, trying to sound helpful while my mind was already racing with warning signals. What's your partner's name? We can keep an eye out. She hesitated like she had to think about it. David. His name is David. He's tall, wearing a blue jacket. Her description was so vague it could have been anyone. We'd be happy to help you look, I offered, though every instinct was telling me something was very wrong. Do you have a radio or phone we could use to call for help? She looked at me intensely when I asked that. Do you have a signal up here? When I shook my head no, her expression changed subtly. It wasn't relief or disappointment, it was something else, almost like anger or maybe frustration. How long are you planning to stay? She asked, and the question felt invasive somehow. Jake whispered quietly beside me, something's wrong with her. The woman didn't leave after I answered her questions. Instead, she got off her bike and sat down on it sideways, still about 10 feet away from us. But she wasn't looking at us anymore. Her eyes kept moving up to the cliff face behind our campsite, studying it with this intense focus. You shouldn't camp so close to the ridge, she said suddenly, her voice flat and emotionless. People fall. The way she said it didn't sound like genuine concern. It sounded almost like a threat or a prediction. Thanks for the warning, I said carefully. We'll be careful. But she wasn't done. She started asking more questions, each one making me more uncomfortable than the last. Are you two out here alone? Does anyone know exactly where you're camping? How much food did you bring? Jake's hand tightened on his camera, and I could feel him getting more nervous with each question. I started giving vague, non-committal answers and looking for a way to end this conversation. Finally, I said, we should probably finish setting up before it gets completely dark. The woman stood up then, swinging her leg back over her bike. But before she left, she looked directly at me and said, if you hear anything tonight, don't go investigating. Stay in your tent. Then she pedaled away, but not back down the trail toward the parking area where we'd started. Instead, she headed up toward the higher part of the ridge in the direction of the cliff face. Within seconds, she disappeared behind some large boulders near the base of the cliff. Jake immediately said, we should leave, right now. I wanted to agree with him, but the sun was almost completely down, and riding our bikes down that technical trail in the dark would be genuinely dangerous. We could easily crash and get seriously hurt. Let's just pack some essentials in our backpacks, I told him, so we can grab them and go quickly if we need to. We spent the next 20 minutes reorganizing our gear with shaking hands, putting our most important items, phones, first aid kit, headlamps into our backpacks. We ate a quick dinner of protein bars and trail mix, barely tasting the food. Jake kept checking his camera obsessively, and I kept studying our trail map, plotting the fastest route down if we needed to leave in a hurry. Neither of us wanted to say it out loud, but we both knew we weren't going to sleep well that night. We retreated into our tent around 8 o'clock, even though it felt way too early. The darkness outside was complete, no moon, just stars that seemed too far away to provide any real light. Jake lay in his sleeping bag fully dressed, including his shoes, and I did the same. We didn't talk much, just lay there listening to the normal sounds of the forest at night. Around 11, I thought maybe we'd overreacted and things would be fine. That's when I heard it. The distinct sound of bike pedals turning, the mechanical click-click-click of gears rotating. It was close, maybe 30 feet away, circling slowly around our campsite. My whole body went rigid. Beside me, I felt Jake grab my arm, his fingers digging in hard. The pedaling stopped abruptly, right outside our tent. What followed was worse than any sound. Heavy breathing, labored and wet-sounding, like someone who'd been exerting themselves for hours. No words, no other movement, just that breathing. It lasted for maybe 2 minutes, though it felt like an hour. Then I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, walking around the perimeter of our tent. They went all the way around, pausing occasionally, then continuing. Jake's breathing was coming in short, panicked gasps next to me, and I put my hand over his mouth, terrified that whoever was out there would hear us. The footsteps finally stopped, and for a moment there was silence. Then a new sound started, coming from the direction of the cliff behind us. Rock scraping against rock, a harsh grinding noise that set my teeth on edge. It was rhythmic and purposeful, like someone was climbing or moving stones around. The sound continued for at least 20 or 30 minutes, sometimes louder, sometimes softer, but never stopping completely. I lay there in the dark, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst, trying to figure out what was happening. The woman's warning echoed in my head, "Don't go investigating, stay in your tent." Was this what she meant? Was she out there right now doing something on that cliff face? Eventually, probably around 1 in the morning, the sound stopped completely. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise had been. Jake and I lay awake for hours, neither of us daring to move or speak, just waiting for dawn. When the first gray light of dawn started filtering through the tent fabric around 6, I carefully unzipped the door and looked outside. What I saw made my blood run cold. There were tire tracks everywhere, circles and circles of them around our tent, like someone had ridden their bike around us dozens of times during the night. Boot prints covered the ground too, including several right next to the tent wall, so close that whoever made them could have reached out and touched the fabric where we were sleeping. But the worst discovery was when I looked up at the cliff face behind us. Someone had climbed up there, maybe 40 or 50 feet, to a small ledge. Stones had been deliberately arranged into a kind of seat, positioned to have a perfect view looking down at our campsite. I could see fresh scratch marks on the rock face from where someone had climbed up. Using Jake's binoculars, I scanned the ledge more carefully. There was a water bottle up there, and something else that made my stomach turn. Dark stains on several of the rocks that looked like blood. "Jake, we need to leave right now," I said, my voice shaking. He was already up, staring at the tire tracks with wide eyes. "What the hell happened last night?" I grabbed his camera. "Take pictures of everything, the tracks, the prints, the cliff, everything." While he photographed the scene with trembling hands, I started breaking down our tent as fast as I could. That's when Jake called out, "There's something at the edge of the cliff." I looked where he was pointing. Caught on some sharp rocks about 20 feet below the ridge edge were pieces of torn fabric, fluttering in the morning breeze. They looked like they'd been there a while, faded by sun and weather. Using the binoculars again, I could make out what looked like more dark stains on the rocks below. My mind was racing with horrible possibilities. The woman's missing partner, David. The blood on her bike seat. Her knowledge of this exact camping spot. We packed everything in record time, our hands shaking so badly we could barely zip up our bags. I kept looking up at that ledge on the cliff, terrified I'd see her sitting there watching us. The morning light made everything look surreal and nightmarish. Just before we finished packing, I thought I heard breathing again, coming from somewhere up on the cliff, but it might have been just the wind whistling through the rocks. We loaded our bikes in a complete panic, not caring about organizing anything properly. All that mattered was getting off this mountain. The ride down was terrifying for different reasons. The trail was technical, full of loose rocks and steep drops, but we pushed our bikes as fast as we dared. Jake nearly crashed twice because he was going too fast, his front wheel washing out on loose gravel. I kept looking back over my shoulder, expecting to see that woman appear behind us on the trail. The descent that had taken us 2.5 hours yesterday, we covered in about an hour and a half, flying down the switchbacks with barely controlled speed. When we finally reached the parking lot, there were a few other hikers there preparing for their own day hikes. The sight of normal people doing normal things made me want to cry with relief. We threw our bikes onto the rack and got into the car, our legs shaking from adrenaline and exertion. Jake was still trembling as I started driving. "We should have left last night," he said quietly. "I know," I replied, feeling a wave of guilt. "I'm sorry, I should have trusted our instincts." As we drove away from the trailhead, our phones started picking up signal again. I checked mine, no missed calls, no messages. The world had just continued on normally while we'd been living through a nightmare. The contrast was jarring. "Are we going to report this?" Jake asked after about 10 minutes. Part of me wanted to just go home, take a hot shower, and try to forget the whole thing. But I kept thinking about that woman's supposed partner, David. If he was really missing, if something had happened to him up on that ridge, we had information that might help. "Yeah," I decided. "We need to tell someone. There's a ranger station about 30 minutes from here. We'll stop there." The ranger station was a small building in a town called Pinewood. We walked in at about 9:30 in the morning and asked to speak with someone about a possible emergency on the mountain. A ranger named Rodriguez came out to meet us, a woman in her 50s with gray streaked hair and a professional demeanor. I started explaining what had happened, describing the woman we'd encountered. As soon as I mentioned the scratched face, the bloodshot eyes, and the blood on the bike seat, Rodriguez's expression changed completely. Her face went pale and she held up a hand to stop me. "Wait here," she said, disappearing into a back office. She returned a minute later carrying a missing persons poster. The photo showed the same woman looking healthier and happier with neat hair and clear eyes. The name at the top read Sarah Mitchell. "This is her," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We saw her yesterday evening." Rodriguez sat down heavily. "Sarah and her climbing partner David Chen were reported missing 3 weeks ago. They were experienced climbers from Seattle, last seen in the same area where you were camping. We've had search teams out there multiple times but found nothing." Jake pulled out his camera. "I took pictures this morning. There's blood on the rocks and fabric caught on the cliff edge." While Rodriguez looked through Jake's photos, her expression growing grimmer with each image, she explained more. "That ridge has a bad history. 2 fatal falls in the past 5 years. Both times, the surviving partner claimed the other person just fell, but the investigations were inconclusive. Sarah had some documented mental health issues, but David's family insisted she'd become increasingly unstable and possibly dangerous during their trip." Rodriguez immediately radioed for a rescue team and asked us to stay to give detailed statements. While we waited, she told us something that made everything even worse. "The pattern you described, circling the tent, watching from above, that matches reports from 2 other campers in the past month. Both times, they reported a woman fitting Sarah's description behaving strangely, asking odd questions, then disappearing into the woods. We thought maybe it was Sarah, surviving out there somehow, but we couldn't find her." A week later, Rodriguez called me with an update. They'd found David Chen's body at the base of the cliff, almost exactly where Jake had photographed the fabric and blood stains. The evidence suggested he hadn't fallen accidentally. Sarah had been arrested 2 days after our report when she approached another group of campers further up the mountain. She'd apparently had some kind of mental breakdown after David died, possibly caused or exacerbated by guilt. She'd been living rough in the mountains, stalking other campers, though investigators weren't sure what her intentions were. The psychological evaluation suggested she was reliving the incident over and over, unable to process what she'd done. Jake didn't want to go hiking again for months after that. He still took his photography seriously but stuck to places with lots of people around. As for me, I'm just grateful we trusted our instincts enough to be cautious, and lucky enough to survive the night. When Sarah had warned us not to investigate if we heard anything, she'd essentially been telling us to ignore her presence. In her fractured mental state, maybe some part of her knew she was dangerous and was trying to protect us. Or maybe she was just establishing control, making sure we'd stay trapped in our tent while she watched from above. I'll never really know, and honestly, I'm okay with that. What matters is that we made it home, and David's family finally got answers. Sometimes I still think about that night, lying in the dark listening to those sounds, not knowing if we'd see morning. It changed something in both of us, made us more aware of how quickly things can go wrong, how important it is to trust that feeling when something isn't right. Jake's leaving for college next month, and I know I'm going to worry about him more than ever. But I also know he's smart and careful. And that night on the ridge taught us both a lesson about survival that we'll carry for the rest of our lives. The memory still wakes me up at night. Emma and I had been together for 2 years, living our simple life in Portland, Oregon. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and I made decent money as an electrician. Last Friday, she came home with this excited look in her eyes and asked if I wanted to go mountain climbing that weekend. I said yes immediately because Emma loved climbing, and I wanted to impress her even though I had never tried it before. We chose Blackstone Ridge, a spot popular with local climbers about 2 hours from the city. I spent Friday night packing our gear, checking the ropes and anchors, loading enough food for 2 days. We left early Saturday morning under clear blue skies. I had no idea that trip would change everything. We arrived at the Blackstone Ridge parking lot around 7 in the morning. Only 3 other cars were there, which meant the trails would not be crowded. Emma checked our climbing equipment while explaining how to use the ropes properly. I listened carefully, trying to remember every detail she told me. The weather was perfect, cool and sunny with no clouds in sight. We started hiking at 7:30, following a well-marked trail through thick pine forest. Emma led the way while I carried the heavier backpack. We talked about work, our future plans, normal couple stuff. She mentioned wanting a promotion at the hospital. I told her about the big electrical project my company just landed. The atmosphere felt relaxed and happy. The first hour went smoothly. We passed a small stream with crystal clear water. Emma showed me how to read the trail markers on the trees. We met an older couple coming down the mountain who smiled and said, "Be careful up top, it gets slippery." We thanked them and kept going. By 9 o'clock, we reached the base of a rock face about 80 feet high, almost vertical. Emma started preparing the ropes and checking the anchors. She explained the hand holds and how to move up safely. I felt nervous but trusted her completely. She climbed first to secure the rope at the top while I watched from below, studying her technique. At 9:30, it was my turn. The rope was firmly anchored and Emma called down encouragement. "You are doing great, babe." My hands and legs shook as I found holds in the rock, pulling myself up inch by inch. After 10 minutes, I made it halfway up and stopped on a small ledge to catch my breath. Looking down made my heart race, not just from the physical effort. As I prepared to continue, I suddenly felt like someone was watching me. Not Emma from above, but from the right side. I turned my head to look but saw only the mountainside and trees. I shook it off, thinking the stress of my first climb was getting to me. I focused on climbing and reached the top 5 minutes later. Emma hugged me and congratulated me. I smiled but could not shake that strange feeling on the back of my neck. Emma noticed something was off. "You look tense. You okay?" I did not want to worry her over what might be nothing, so I said, "Yeah, just tired from the climb." We rested for 10 minutes, drinking water and eating protein bars. Emma checked the map on her phone and said we had about 2 miles left to the summit. If we kept this pace, we would make it before noon. I agreed, and we packed the climbing gear back into my backpack. As we prepared to leave, that feeling came back stronger. I felt watched, observed, tracked. I turned and looked down below the rock face but saw nothing except trees and stone. Emma called out, "Ready to go." I nodded and followed her, but my mind kept circling back to that sensation. The trail became narrower, running along the mountainside with a cliff on one side and a drop on the other. We had to move carefully, step by step. Emma stayed about 15 feet ahead of me. At 10:15, Emma stopped to take photos with her camera. I waited while she captured the valley below and distant mountains. She turned to photograph me next. Then she suddenly froze, staring through the viewfinder. She lowered the camera slowly, her expression changing from cheerful to concerned. She looked past me, up toward the ridge behind us. "What's wrong?" I asked. Emma hesitated before answering. "I thought I saw something move on the ridge above us, probably just a deer or something." But her voice did not sound convinced. I turned to look up at the ridge about 200 feet above our position. Large boulders and short trees covered it. I saw nothing moving, but something felt wrong. "Let's keep moving. We're exposed here," Emma said. I agreed immediately. She put away her camera and started walking faster than before. I stayed close, not wanting the distance between us to grow. 15 minutes later, the trail curved into a small forested area. I felt safer with trees providing cover, though the dimmer light created more shadows. Emma did not speak, just focused on moving forward. That watched feeling returned, stronger now, covering my whole body like invisible eyes tracking every movement. I glanced back at the empty trail behind us, but anything could hide between those trees. Then I heard it. A branch snapping, not from ahead but from our left. Emma heard it too and stopped. We both stood silent, listening. Complete quiet followed. No birds, no insects, nothing at all. Emma whispered, "This doesn't feel right." I asked, "Should we turn back?" She checked her watch. "We're almost halfway. If we push through, we can reach the summit in 40 minutes. I said, "Okay, let's hurry." Neither of us felt safe, but we thought if we reached the top quickly, we could take a different trail down. Emma checked her phone but had no signal. We could not call for weather updates or emergency services. We had to rely on the offline map. The trail led us out of the forest at 10:50 to a rocky, exposed area. We could see the summit ahead now, close enough to make out the peak. The weather started changing. Wind picked up and clouds rolled in from the west. Emma said, "Weather's changing. We need to be quick." We stopped by a large boulder to drink water and rest briefly. I looked around, taking in the wider view from this elevation. I could see the trail we had covered and the ridge above us. Emma took out her camera, wanting one more shot before we reached the summit. I stood up so she could capture the landscape. She adjusted the lens and zoomed in on the valley. Then she stopped abruptly. "Oh my God," she said, her voice shaking. What is it?" I asked. Emma did not answer right away, her eyes fixed on the camera screen. "Emma, talk to me," I insisted. She lowered the camera, her hand trembling. "There's something on the ridge. It's been following us." She handed me the camera. "Look, zoom in on that ridge where we were before." I looked through the viewfinder and zoomed in on the ridge about half a mile back. Between the boulders stood a dark shape. Not a deer, not a bear. It stood upright, tall, completely still. Too far away to see details clearly, but definitely human-shaped. "Maybe it's another hiker," I suggested weakly. Emma shook her head. "Hikers don't stand still like that, and look, it's not on the trail." She was right. The figure stood among the boulders, nowhere near the marked path. No reason for anyone to be there. Emma scrolled through her earlier photos. In a picture from 30 minutes ago, a small dark spot appeared in the distance. In another from 15 minutes back, that spot had moved closer. "It's been following us the whole time," Emma said. My blood ran cold. My hands and feet went numb, not from the weather but from fear. That feeling of being watched since morning was now confirmed. Emma decided quickly. "We need to leave. Now." I asked if we should go back down, but Emma looked at the long, exposed trail below, then at the summit, which was closer. "If we go to the summit, there's another trail down the other side. It's shorter." I argued, "But that thing is between us and the summit." Emma replied, "Not directly. If we move fast, we can get ahead." I was not sure, but I trusted her experience. She had climbed many times and knew terrain better than me. We packed our gear quickly. Emma led at a much faster pace. I followed closely, afraid to look back but feeling that presence behind us, still there, still watching. 5 minutes later, Emma stopped so suddenly I almost crashed into her. She pointed ahead. "There." I followed her gaze. On the ridge ahead near the summit stood another shape, identical to the first one, standing motionless, looking down at us. "How did it get there so fast?" I whispered. Emma's voice was barely audible. "That's not the same one. There are two of them." We stood frozen in the middle of the trail, one shape behind us, one ahead. We could not go up or down. Emma was breathing fast, panic setting in. "Off trail," I said. "We go off the trail." Emma protested. "That's dangerous. The terrain is unstable." I asked, "More dangerous than those things?" She went silent, then nodded. We turned right, leaving the trail and entering an area of rocks and low bushes. No clear path existed here. We had to climb over boulders and avoid deep crevices. Emma went first and I helped her keep balance. Every step required caution. The rocks were slippery and could give way any time. My heavy backpack threw off my balance, but we did not dare stop. I could not resist looking back. The shape that had been behind us had moved. It was no longer on the ridge but down near the trail level. Still too far to see details clearly, but it was definitely following us. "Don't look back. Keep moving," Emma shouted. I turned forward and focused, though my hands and legs were shaking. We reached a small cliff, maybe 15 feet down. No rope, no equipment, just free climbing. Emma went first, searching for handholds. I stood at the top, watching her descend. It looked dangerous. While Emma climbed down, I checked behind us again. The shape had gotten closer. Now I could make out that it was tall, wearing dark clothes, but the way it moved was wrong. Not running, but covering ground impossibly fast. Your turn. Come on, Emma called from below. I turned and started climbing down, finding handholds, my foot slipping once. I almost fell but caught myself. Halfway down the cliff face, I heard a sound from above, like rocks tumbling. I looked up and saw the shape standing at the edge of the cliff, looking straight down at me. Only 40 feet separated us now. Fear paralyzed me. My arms and legs lost strength. I clung to the rock, unable to move. Move now, Emma screamed from below, but my body would not obey. Emma started climbing back up toward me, reaching halfway, extending her hand. Grab my hand. I forced myself to move down, finding a foothold, reaching out. Our hands connected. Emma pulled while I pushed, both of us working together until I reached the ground. We fell back, sitting hard, gasping for air. Emma yanked me to my feet. We have to keep going. I looked up. The shape still stood at the cliff edge, not climbing down, just watching. Emma grabbed my hand and pulled me into a run. We crossed the rocky area, not caring about direction, just wanting distance. My shins got scraped from stumbling over stones, but I did not stop. We entered thick forest and kept running. Branches scratched our faces and arms. Emma held my hand tight, leading the way. We ran without stopping for 10 minutes until Emma suddenly halted behind a large tree. We both collapsed, unable to breathe properly. I looked at Emma. Her face was scratched, hair wild. She looked at me with red, terrified eyes. We listened. Silence. No sounds of pursuit, just our breathing and wind moving through branches. We sat against the tree trunk, trying to recover. Emma pulled out her phone, still no signal. I checked my backpack. Several items had fallen out during the run. Emma looked around frantically. I don't know where we are. I did not understand. What do you mean? She explained. We went off trail. I lost orientation. Without the trail to reference, she could not match our position to the map. We only knew we were somewhere in the middle of the mountain. We need to find a way down. Anyway, Emma said. Which direction? I asked. She looked at the sun, now leaning west. Downhill, just keep going downhill. We stood and started moving downhill, slower now, more careful. No more running because an injury would be fatal out here. Emma led, I followed 10 feet behind. 20 minutes later, we passed through dense forest and reached a small ravine with a stream. Water rushed over slick stones. We had to cross to continue. Emma started across, stepping onto rocks in the middle. Water flowed over her ankles. I waited on the bank, watching. I heard a branch snap behind me. I spun around but saw nothing. Yet that feeling, it was close now, very close. Emma, hurry, I called urgently. She looked back, saw my expression, and knew something was wrong. She moved faster across the stream. Then the shape appeared from between the trees, 30 feet from me. For the first time I saw it clearly, tall, at least 6'5", wearing dark, old-looking clothes. But the face, there was no face, just a blank, smooth surface where features should be. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, nothing. Just smooth, pale skin stretched over a skull shape. I could not move, could not breathe. Emma screamed my name from the other side of the stream. Run, run now. The thing took a step toward me, not walking normally but gliding somehow, feet barely touching ground. That broke my paralysis. I turned and jumped into the stream, not caring about the rocks. Cold water shocked my system. I slipped, went down on one knee, scrambled back up. Emma reached across, grabbed my jacket, and hauled me onto the far bank. We ran again, but this time I heard it behind us. Not footsteps exactly, but movement, rapid movement through brush. Emma pulled me left, then right, weaving between trees. My lungs burned. My legs felt like they would give out. Emma suddenly stopped at the edge of a steep slope. Below us, maybe 200 feet down, I could see a road. An actual paved road with a car driving past. Civilization. We have to slide down, Emma said. It's too steep, I protested. She looked back at the forest. I heard that movement getting closer. We don't have a choice, she said. Emma sat down and pushed off, sliding down the slope on her back and side, using her hands to control speed. I did not think. I just sat and pushed. The world became a blur of dirt and rocks. I tumbled, rolled, hit trees that slowed me down. Pain shot through my shoulder when I crashed into a fallen log. Finally, I hit flat ground hard, all air knocked from my lungs. Emma was already up, limping to the road, waving her arms at an approaching truck. The truck stopped. An older man got out, his face confused. "What happened? Are you kids okay?" Emma was crying, trying to explain. I stood up, every muscle screaming, and looked back up the slope. At the top, barely visible between trees, two shapes stood side by side, watching, not following, just watching. The truck driver followed my gaze but saw nothing. "Come on, let's get you to a hospital," he said. At the hospital, they treated our cuts and bruises. Emma had a sprained ankle. I had a separated shoulder and multiple contusions. The police came, asked questions. We told them what happened. They searched Blackstone Ridge for 2 days but found nothing unusual. No tracks, no evidence of anyone following us. They suggested we experienced altitude sickness or dehydration causing hallucinations. But I know what I saw. Emma knows too. We never went back to Blackstone Ridge. Emma sold all her climbing gear. We moved to an apartment in downtown Portland, as far from mountains as possible. Sometimes at night, I wake up and look out the window, checking the street below, making sure nothing is standing there watching. Emma started seeing a therapist. So did I? They say trauma affects people differently. Maybe they are right, but I know the truth. Something lives in those mountains. Something that does not want to be seen clearly. Something that follows. And the worst part, the part that haunts me most, is knowing that if that truck had not come when it did, if we had not made it to that road, no one would have ever found us. We would have become another missing persons case, another mystery. 2 more people who went into the mountains and never came back. Now when people ask why I avoid hiking, I just say I prefer the city. I do not tell them about the things on the ridge. I do not tell them how close we came. Because some experiences change you forever, and some places should never be visited. Blackstone Ridge is one of those places.